Today's teleconference session, we will introduce you to ARNNL's Quality Assurance Framework for RNs and NPs. The session will include what we refer to as the milestones of QA, or quality assurance, providing you initially with the background of Bill 32, an act to amend the Registered Nurses Act 2008. Trudy will then address the components of the bill, including the Legislative Quality Assurance Committee. This will be followed by ARNNL's actions to prepare for proclamation of Bill 32, which will include the work of the Quality Assurance Development Committee. We will then take you through aspects related to the Quality Assurance Program, including the draft screening process that, as Director of Professional Conduct Review, I will utilize when screening to determine if an issue or issues, concerns, will be referred to the Quality Assurance Program. Finally, we will then review the next steps for the quality assurance as ARNNL prepares for the proclamation of Bill 32. To begin, Trudy will give us a brief history of the quality assurance provision, including information pertaining to Bill 32. Trudy?
Thank you, Michelle. Good afternoon, everyone, on this nice sunny afternoon. I don't know what it's like in the rest of the province, but we have some beautiful weather here in St. John's this afternoon, even though it still is a little bit nippy outside. So I'm just going to give you a sort of a brief overview, and I will speak to some of the specific sections of the bill, which I believe you have available to you on PowerPoint. You should be aware, though, that those are only excerpts from the particular bill, the more salient points that flow from the amendment. The entire piece of the amendment would be available to you once the full act comes in force. So let me just back up a little bit before I get into those particular provisions and sort of give you a brief overview. This all started back in the spring of 2014, when there had been some discussions between Legislative Council with government and Lynn Power here, our Executive Director, in terms of starting to talk about a quality assurance program. And it was significant because we were probably, us and the social workers at the time, the only health regulatory bodies that really didn't have a quality assurance mandate in the legislation. The Medical Act provides for it, the Health Professions Act provides for it, psychologists, pharmacy. So at that point in time, in the spring of 2014, that was the impetus to start talking about moving us and the social workers towards a quality assurance program as well. So real discussions started to take place in September of 2014. And at that point in time, we were envisioning that this would take 2 to 3 years, a year or two to actually see the amendments come to fruition. However, government at the time felt it was important to act on this putting in place those amendments, and in December of 2014, the amendment was actually passed in the House of Assembly for both nurses and social workers in terms of bill the bill that was passed at the time. And the slide provides for you, if you look to the first slide, the overview of basically what the intent was at the time when this was passed. And this is a quote from Minister Kent at the time. And he said, "The primary goal of quality assurance provisions is to strengthen and improve the practices of registered nurses and ultimately provide better protection for the people of Newfoundland and Labrador. There are currently over 6,800 registered nurses with the Association of Registered Nurses of Newfoundland and Labrador who are providing the highest level of care every day to people in this province. However, in those cases where there are concerns, it is important for the association to have the tools it needs to address those concerns rather than wait until they become more serious and thereby require engagement in the disciplinary process." So there's a couple of pieces that we need to take from this quote. The first is that quality assurance is all about prevention. It's about putting mechanisms in place and giving the association the ability to catch those things before they actually become concerns where the disciplinary process is engaged. So I think that's the second point to this, is to recognize that the quality assurance program is separate from the disciplinary process. They may interact at some point in time, but our hope is that they never have to interact, or only in one circumstance would they interact. And I'll elaborate on that a little later. So the key, it's not disciplinary. It's intended to be preventive and to address a concern so that it doesn't reach that discipline process that we want to avoid here. So this bill received royal assent back in December of 2014. And what that means is that this has been approved by the House of Assembly. However, the House of Assembly at the time wanted to ensure that we had the time, because this will take putting in place an actual program takes a lot of legwork to do. So government of the day thought that they would delay proclaiming the bill. So what that actually means is that the amendment is not yet in force, and it won't be enforced until the Lieutenant Governor and Council passes it or approves it in the House of Assembly. So that is yet to come. While it's 2014 and we're now into 2017, so a significant amount of time has passed. But I can assure you, when you hear from Michelle, that a fair amount of legwork has been done within that period of time to ensure that when the bill is actually made into law and proclaimed and put into force, that we're ready to roll out with a program that's adopted with the other tools that we have within our arsenal, shall we say, to deal with concerns that come to our attention. So, and again, we'll talk about that a little bit further. So, let's start with Section 35(1) of the Bill 32, and Section 31 is the section that makes it mandatory for Council to establish a quality assurance committee. And that's exactly what the first section there says. Council shall establish a quality assurance committee that shall have responsibility for and shall establish and operate a program of quality assurance for registered nurses. So this is not a circumstance where the association can decide not to do this. This is mandatory. Government has said, once this is proclaimed, that you have to establish a quality assurance committee. So from that, then we go into section sub 2 there that talks about the ability of the committee to get some assistance in carrying out its mandate. So in doing that, the Quality Assurance Committee may appoint persons registered as registered nurses under the Act to act as assessors to assist the committee to perform its duties and exercise its powers under the Act. And this is fairly important because committee members may need to draw on some level of expertise to go out and assess a concern that comes in. So there will be some assessment skills that will be necessary, some investigation type skills that will be necessary. So the committee needs to have that ability to draw on that level of expertise to assist it in fulfilling its mandate. Subsection 3 there identifies that the committee and any person that's appointed by the committee to assist them will have the powers, privileges, and immunities of the Public Inquiries Act. And that is a significant power. It's a significant ability because that will enable the assessor or the committee to, for example, issue a subpoena to somebody if the need arises, to compel someone to come and speak with them on a concern if the need arises. And that is significant. Not all of the regulatory bodies have that ability under their quality assurance provisions, because each act, although very similar, there are some nuances, and there are certainly some health professions who do not have the ability under the to investigate or assess under the Public Inquiries Act. So Section 35 sub 2 is directed at, I guess, what the registered nurse must do in order to, in circumstances where there is a request or a directive from the committee. And you will see that we're seeing the word shall again. So a registered nurse shall comply with a request or a directive of the committee or a person appointed to act on behalf of the committee in connection with the conduct of a quality assurance review with respect to the registered nurse or his or her practice by the committee. So again, this is something we're seeing that's mandatory. This is not a situation where a registered nurse who's subject to a quality assurance review has the ability to say, thank you, but I don't think I'm going to participate in this process. This is mandatory. For example, if the assessor is seeking a response from the registered nurse with respect to a concern that's identified with that registered nurse's practice, the RN cannot refuse to cooperate and respond to the inquiries of the assessor or the committee. Similarly, the registered nurse must comply with any directive from the committee. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the powers of the committee. And again, that becomes mandatory. So the question becomes, what happens if a registered nurse who's subject to a quality assurance review says and takes the position, I'm not going to respond to your request, or I'm not going to comply with your directive? Well, at that point in time, under Section 35(3) sub 4 of the Act, that means that the Quality Assurance Review Committee, it is mandatory then for them to refer it on to the Director of Professional Conduct Review, who then must refer it on to the Complaints Authorization Committee as an allegation. So at that point in time, we've jumped from the quality assurance world into the disciplinary world and the disciplinary process and that flows from that. So this piece of legislation, this amendment to the Act, has significant teeth, and it has teeth because the whole aim here is at protecting the public and preventing something from becoming a significant issue where the public safety is impacted. So I'm going to talk now a little bit about Section 35(3) in particular, and the powers that the committee will have. And those powers are very significant. And as I said, there's big teeth here, and you'll get to see now just how big those teeth are. In terms of how a quality assurance review can become engaged, there's a number of ways that this can happen. The Quality Assurance Committee themselves may initiate a quality assurance review. A review can be initiated at the request of the Director of Professional Conduct Review. So if, for example, a concern comes into the Director of Professional Conduct Review and in her review of it considers this is really not conduct deserving of sanction, this is probably better addressed through the Quality Assurance Committee, then she can refer that matter onto the Quality Assurance Committee for their consideration. The Complaints Authorization Committee as well, if the matter goes to the Complaints Authorization Committee and they, in their assessment, are of the view, this is really not conduct deserving of sanction, this is really a quality assurance type of issue, they can also refer it on back to the Quality Assurance Committee. So this is what I'm referring to where I say there is some interchange between the two processes, but they're really separate processes. So in terms of what the committee itself can do in undertaking a quality assurance review, there are significant powers again under subsection 2. So it can require a registered nurse or another person who has information pertaining to or possession of records that relate to a registered nurse's practice to provide information, and that can include patient records. And those records can be reviewed or inspected. They can be copied by the committee or the assessor appointed by the committee. As well, the committee can require a nurse to undergo an examination, an evaluation, assessment, or review of his or her professional practice or capacity or fitness to practice. So we're not talking strictly about competency issues here. We're also talking about fitness to practice issues. So if there are wellness issues at play here, then the committee can also order an examination, an assessment, or an evaluation from a fitness and capacity perspective. Keeping in mind that this is all targeted at quality assurance and prevention. This is not from a disciplinary process perspective. The committee can also order that there be periodic or random audits of the registered nurse's practice. Again, that has significant teeth. In terms of the remedies, the order that a quality assurance committee can make, they're very broad ranging. They can order counseling, and that can include substance abuse counseling. They can order that the nurse obtain medical treatment. They can order from a remedial perspective a course of studies or education or training, and that could be anything from reviewing the code of ethics to reviewing the standards to actual educational programs through Center for Nursing Studies, for example, or whatever else is necessary to ensure that the competency is there for the nurse to continue to engage in safe nursing practice, because this is what this is all about, safe nursing practice. We're back to the teeth again here in sub 4, restrict a nurse's nursing practice. So that again is significant. And it would have to be a serious type of issue from a practice perspective to put a restriction in place. But that ability is there if it's considered that that is necessary in order to protect the public, but also enable the nurse to continue nursing practice. And the whole key here again is safe nursing practice. Obtain supervised clinical experience, and that's again to ensure that you might see this, for example, I'm just tossing this out because we haven't been down this road yet, but often we would look at seeing if someone is going to do a course of study to ensure that that course of study is actually proved to be successful from a practice perspective, then we might see a period of clinical supervision following that educational piece to ensure that, yes, the nurse is on the right track and things are working well. Can also order that the registered nurse practice under conditions that the committee may specify. And finally, there is the ability for the committee to order reporting of compliance with the order. So again, those orders linking back to the nurse's mandatory compliance with those orders. Those are the directives that if the nurse does not comply with any of the directives that I've just referred to, then that nurse is essentially in breach of the Act, and the committee will forward it on to the Complaints Authorization Committee as an allegation. There is the ability under Section 35(5) of the bill to actually terminate a review. And the termination of a review would come into place if during the course of the review and the assessment that's been completed that the Quality Assurance Committee is of the view that this is really moved from a quality assurance issue and we're now into conduct deserving of sanction within the meaning of Section 18 of the Act. If that is the case, then the nurse is advised that it's moving there. All of the information at that point in time that the committee has collected through its assessor or directly itself gets forwarded on to the Complaints Authorization Committee. And so everything, all the documents, everything that, any interviews that would have taken place, all of that goes to the Complaints Authorization Committee. And at that point in time, this is that crossover again where the information now flows into the disciplinary process, but keeping in mind, we don't want it to go there. We want to ensure that we're dealing with this from a quality management perspective. Big piece here is that even if there is an order that's made under the quality assurance review, if they make an order but then refer it on to the Complaints Authorization Committee, that order still stays in place. So just because it's sent on doesn't nullify the order. That's still a good order. So if there's restrictions, for example, placed on a nurse's license, if there are conditions on the nurse's license, that still stays in place and will remain there until the professional conduct review process at that point in time, the disciplinary process is engaged or finalized. I think the best way, because I'll be honest with you, when we started looking at this from a quality assurance perspective and looking at a quality assurance framework, it took some time for all of us here sort of to get our head around this process and how to sort of conceptualize it. For me, I think the best way to look at this was to look at this as a continuum where you have quality assurance on one end and the professional conduct review process on the other end. And at some point in time, we would hope that the concerns stay on the quality assurance end of things. However, if during the process issues are identified, then the more significant those issues become, the closer you're going to get to that sliding scale where you're sliding across that continuum and you're passing the gray zone and you're going into the regulatory conduct review process. So I think that's the best way I can describe it. Pam King-Jesso talks about going over the falls. So that's her conceptual piece to this, and she can't speak today, so I'm speaking for her. So we want to prevent the nurse from going over the falls, so to speak. We want to put in place mechanisms that guide the nurse, that identify the issue, and put tools in place and mechanisms in place so that going over the falls does not happen. So I guess that's sort of the nuts and bolts of what we talk about when we're talking about the quality assurance process. The final slide that I have there that I've already alluded to, and this comes specifically from the bill, that this act will not come into force until it's actually proclaimed by the Lieutenant Governor and Council. We would anticipate that will probably happen within the next few months. We're ready to go for the most part here. The legwork has been done, and Pam has certainly been working on putting together a quality assurance committee, but I won't jump the gun on any of that because Michelle's going to talk more specifically to that. So I'm going to pass it over to Michelle.
Thank you, Trudy. And I will now continue with the next milestone of the quality assurance, which was the development of the Quality Assurance Program Development Committee. And that was in June of 2015 when Council approved the terms of reference for the QADC, as we commonly call it. And so, as Trudy stated, it was December 2nd, 2014, that Bill 32, an act to amend the Registered Nurses Act, was introduced in the House of Assembly. And Section 3511 of Bill 32 states that the Council shall establish a quality assurance committee that shall have responsibility for and shall establish and operate a program of quality assurance for registered nurses. In response, as I said, in June 2015, Council approved the establishment of the QA Development Committee for the purposes of making recommendations on the structure of an ARNNL quality assurance program and related linkages between other ARNNL regulatory and professional practice services in preparation for the proclamation of a QA committee pursuant to Section 35 of the Act. As Trudy said, we're pending that proclamation now. On September the 23rd of 2015, ARNNL Council approved the membership for the Quality Assurance Development Committee. And you will see on your slide the committee members were a diverse group. We had professional practice coordinators. We had 2 with Maxine Power-Murn and Sylvia Diamond-Freak. Frontline manager, we had Darlene Marr. Quality assurance, quality initiatives, or risk management consultants, there were two, Dale Nixon and Deanne Emberley. We had an RN or NP who had participated in the ARNNL PCR process, and we had Moira O'Regan-Hogan, ARNNL resource person Pam King-Jesso, and public representative was B. Courtney. So there was quite a diverse group participating as members of the QADC and gave very valuable input into the process. In November 2015, the QADC had their first meeting, and they worked and continued to work up until January of 2017 when they completed their work. And in June of 2016, the QADC provided Council with an initial update on their work to date, and in October of 2016, a presentation was made to Council on that work. And as I said, their work completed in January of 2017, which included the production of the following documents related to ARNNL's quality assurance principles, the quality assurance framework for ARNNL, ARNNL's quality assurance program and intersections with ARNNL's professional conduct review process. And as Trudy spoke to, although the processes do intersect, it is hoped that the quality assurance process and the tools and the resources or remedies, as Trudy spoke to, that are available through the bill and what will become proclaimed within our Act, that this will prevent things from moving along and going over the falls, as Pam says, into the PCR process. Recommendations of issues and concerns that could be for referral to the Quality Assurance Program or the Quality Assurance Review, and the screening process when I am, as Director of Professional Conduct Review, reviewing whether it be letters of allegations or concerns, QA concerns that come in to make determinations of how they will proceed in the process. Have the next slide there, and some of the QADC's initial discussion focused on what will be the definition of quality assurance and the development of quality assurance principles that the committee would utilize while doing their work. So in the absence of a legislative definition of quality assurance, and if you would look at the bill, there's not a definition of QA, the Quality Assurance Development Committee decided to define QA as a set of activities, so structure and process, that are planned for and carried out systemically to ensure registered nurses practice safely, competently, compassionately, and ethically. The following principles that you see set out on the slide guided the QADC. In making the recommendations on components of the QA framework outlined in the QA terms of reference, or the QADC terms of reference, reviewing the potential list of issues to be referred to the QA program, included in the document a background report to inform the development of ARNNL Quality Assurance Program, reviewing other potential issues to be referred to the QA program generated by committee discussion, consultation with other regulatory bodies, and discussion with ARNNL staff. The Quality Assurance Committee may also utilize these principles in further developing and implementing the QA program and framework. As you see on the slides, the principles state that QA activities shall fall within the mandate of ARNNL. QA activities, of course, must fall within the mandate of ARNNL as a regulatory authority. The QA program will be enacted in accordance with Bill 32. Value added. Any QA activity should add value, and any QA activity that adds cost or time without value would be seen as a waste. There should not already be an activity, whether internal or external to ARNNL, that already adequately addresses the issue. So examples being the alternative dispute resolution, the PCR process, and professional practice nursing processes within the RHAs. The QA activity needs to be practical and simple in terms that is likely to succeed, to be reasonable to do or use, and be able to be appropriately resourced. Preventative, and as Trudy mentioned, this is the premise for the Quality Assurance Program, is activities should be focused on prevention of conduct deserving of sanction. So early intervention with a registered nurse or nurse practitioner to prevent conduct or practice from proceeding on to become conduct deserving of sanction. Evidence-informed, implementation of QA activities should be guided by the best research and information that is available. And finally, agile. QA activities may change based on new evidence or emerging patterns in nursing practice and regulations. In November of 2015, with the initial meeting of the QADC taking place, it was noted by the committee that the QA program referred to in Bill 32 referred only to the legislated quality assurance review process as it relates to a registered nurse's practice. It did not address other quality assurance elements, structures that ARNNL already has in place to ensure registered nurses and nurse practitioners practice safely, competently, compassionately, and ethically. The QADC, therefore, created the following QA framework for ARNNL. And you see that framework at slide number 12, noting that the QA program that Trudy referenced in her slides is one key element of ARNNL's umbrella quality assurance framework. So you see quality assurance is there on the left-hand side towards the top of the circle below the rectangle, but the other components of a ARNNL's quality assurance framework are there. So you have continuing competency program, practice consultation. I'm having trouble reading the small slide. I gotta flip over. I can't read the small print. Communication, so access and update. Engagement with the membership through council, through committees, workplace representatives, student representative programs. And at the very top, of course, is the establishment of the standards of practice, code of ethics, and entry-level competencies. So the proposed framework comprises a general vision for QA within ARNNL that all nurses practice safely, competently, compassionately, and ethically according to the standards of practice and code of ethics. And I've outlined the other elements under the umbrella framework, as you can see on the slide. And it incorporates the QA program within the new QA framework, and that will strengthen ARNNL's ability to promote good nursing practice, prevent poor nursing practice, and intervene when nursing practice is unacceptable, but not conduct deserving of sanction, in the interest of the public, of course, of the province. This slide provides an overview of the interaction of ARNNL's professional conduct review process and the quality assurance process. The items in red represent quality assurance, and given proclamation of these provisions of the Act are pending, interactions with the current PCR process are shown via the broken lines. Trudy, you spoke to QA being non-disciplinary. Would you like to give a comment on the interaction and the diagram as we presented today?
Right. Well, if you look, you'll see that while they're separate processes, the processes will interact in a couple of places, potentially. As I said earlier, you'll see that the committee, the Quality Assurance Committee, can actually refer to the CAC, which you see by one of the broken lines up to the CAC. But you can also see, when you look at the CAC powers, they can also refer it back to the Quality Assurance Committee. So that is the extent of the interaction that will arise. It's simply the dual referral process from one process to the other process. So that is the extent of it, and the processes are set up separately and will be operationalized very separately.
Thank you, Trudy. The next slide I'm going to speak to is the screening process. And as Trudy presented, the quality assurance provisions, once proclaimed, will authorize the Director of Professional Conduct Review to refer a concern to the Quality Assurance Committee. Given this, and in keeping with the principles to guide the program, a screening process with criteria was developed by the Quality Assurance Development Committee. The screening process provides criteria that will be used as a letter of concern is reviewed and a determination made if the concern is appropriate to refer to the QA committee. So factors, as you see on the slide, factors for consideration when determining if an issue will be referred to the program are given below, but they're not limited to the following. The first one is the issue is about a registrant and is in writing. So consistent with the process or the allegation process used in PCR, concerns must be in writing and name the registered nurse. Anonymous letters, telephone calls, or emails will not proceed. ARNNL advises persons currently seeking information on the PCR process and will in the future with respect to QA that the allegation or concern must be in writing and signed by the individual. B, sufficient information is contained in the documentation communication to make a determination. The Director of Professional Conduct Review may request additional information from a complainant or a registrant prior to making a determination. This will be undertaken when the information in the letter of concern lacks sufficient detail or may be to some degree vague. As an example, the person submitting the letter will be requested to provide additional particulars or details around the issue of concern. Requesting additional information is not an investigation or a quality assurance review, but seeks to clarify information to inform decision making. The third criteria, the issue does not appear to be conduct deserving of sanction. And the RN Act sets out the definitions of conduct deserving of sanction and the process to be followed when an allegation has been filed. Council has further defined conduct deserving of sanction, the categories set out in the Act, in the bylaws with examples under each category. This information will be referenced as screening is completed. Allegations of conduct deserving of sanctions or issues that appear to be conduct deserving of sanction would not be referred to QA and would be addressed through PCR. Criteria D, there are previous allegations or QA issues against the registrant. Of course, as part of the screening process, a registrant's file at ARNNL will be referenced, and this information, together with other screening criteria, will be considered when determining the appropriateness of a referral of the current concern or issue to the QA committee. The next criteria, there is risk to the public. Public protection is the mandate of ARNNL, and the quality assurance legislation was developed with public protection in mind, and again developed with the thought that it would be early intervention and preventative. And this screening criteria, of course, like all the others, is not in isolation, and contextual factors relating to the concern would be considered as this criteria is applied. The next one, the action or behavior appears to be reckless or intentional. Concerns that suggest a registrant was reckless or actions were intentional and such that they disregarded nursing practice standards or other areas. In most circumstances, these would not be managed through QA, as such matters are likely going to be referred to the PCR process. G and H can be kind of looked at together. There's reception for remedial intervention, and there is a potential opportunity for intervention. As QA is seen as preventative and was contemplated as a process of early intervention, situations where an action or actions, including remedial measures, can be implemented, and of course they're available, that would point to it may be appropriate to refer them to quality assurance. The final one we have there, the issue can be, has been, or can be sufficiently managed within the employment setting. One of the things we'd look at from a screening perspective is, does the employer have resources to them to address the practice concern? And the intent of the quality assurance process is not to take over the work of employers, either through their professional practice departments, or if they call it employee development, maybe some of the smaller organizations. But certainly the processes that are working now and that employers have in place to assist nurses with practice issues, they're certainly they certainly would continue, and there is much strength in those processes. So, but as part of the screening, it would certainly look at to see if the employment setting would be able to offer the resources that may be needed to assist the nurse with the issue. Each situation will be contextually unique, and therefore the particulars of the situation will be counted in as screening is completed. As I said earlier, although this screening process has 9 criteria listed here, analysis of them collectively would assist in decision making. So the next steps for the quality assurance process. So at this point, while we're awaiting a proclamation, ARNNL is continuing its work in preparation, and there's operational planning underway related to the recommendations that came from the Quality Assurance Development Committee, and the specific role of the QA committee are underway. ARNNL is also moving forward in naming committee members for the Quality Assurance Committee. And you may be familiar with having seen a posting on ARNNL's website recruiting RN members. We still have a need for a couple of more RN members, 2 to 3 members, to fill the complement. And if any of those attending today are interested in being a member of the QA committee, contact Pam King-Jesso. And we will also be completing the recruitment for the public representative for the Quality Assurance Committee. We'll be going out to the public via the website, ARNNL's website, and also through public service announcements later this week. So that'll be something that you'll be seeing on the website, and you may be hearing on the on the radio.